Join me today. I'm going to be discussing insurance and generative AI. We're going to be looking at how we can actually leverage generative AI to improve revenue, address ethics, and governance concerns with insurance. I'm Bryce Ominski. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of iRangers. And today, Gurpreet Bal, the Chief Architect for Guardian Life, will be joining us in our discussion. She's focused on serving data, technology strategy, architecture, and innovation needs for Guardian Life Insurance across all its business units. She's a strong contributor to technology operating models. Prior to Guardian Life, she held multiple positions with engineering architecture organizations at SP Global, General Electric, Goldman Sachs, and others. Throughout her career, she is known to be somebody who is elegantly determined, and I want to delve into that more. She does a lot of work for the community. I won't go through everything, but there's a ton there. And today we're going to be talking about insurance. We're going to be talking about technology. And as we get into the topic today, I think this is one of those things where if you look 10 years out, it's really easy to underestimate the progress we're going to make. Whereas if you look 2 years out, it's easy to overestimate it. So how do you get to that sweet spot? And how do you figure out what's happening with insurance technology? Gurpreet, let's get right into it. Recently, there was actually an article that the New York State Department of Financial Services is insisting that insurance companies put a framework in to govern generative AI. That's the way I interpret. That's what I heard in the article. This came out a few days ago. What are your thoughts around putting a framework in, and what does this mean to a lot of the insurers that you see out there?
Bryce, thank you very much for having me first, and thank you, viewers.
You're welcome.
So number one, with NYDFS, the regulation was accelerated, but there was a continuous effort going on for quite some time, and there was industry feedback, and it applies to all financial services, not just insurance. That's one clarification. And the regulation mainly calls out on the not making sure that there is not single sign-on, making sure that you have proper security login controls, like have MFA. If you see the latest SEC X handle that happened, fiasco that happened like about 2 weeks ago, where somebody was allowed to some group of hackers went in and they posed around the Bitcoin ETFs, and SEC came out, provided all the right answers, and they were transparent about it. But in the root cause, what I was reading, the root cause was they didn't have MFA. It's simple things these days. Like, to me, you have to have MFA. So the NYDFS regulation is basically calling all financial services to make sure to understand what the cybersecurity threats are, to make sure that you are proactive in preparing for them. And it's a proactive risk measure rather than an after reactive measure. They're also asking that have programs in place that when something happens, how are you going to monitor it? How are you going to communicate it? Who are you going to communicate it to? Who are you going to guardrail to respond to that problem? How are you going to find what is the level of effect? What is the level of impact? So there are quite a few things that are happening between the regulation and the way I look at it is it's basically forcing a framework.
Well, that's actually really interesting, Gurpreet. Like, when you talk about a framework, do you see this as sort of like one of many security frameworks that's being put in place that just is going to hit financial services? And I'm thinking, does this build on top of other frameworks that you might be using? Like maybe somebody might have, a Cloud Security Alliance matrix, and then they add this to it. Or is this really kind of a standalone thing? And the second part to this is this just about general financial services? Or is there really something, like when I read the article, I got the impression there was something about generative AI in this and a governance model. And I'm wondering, how does that all fit in? Two big questions. Maybe it's the framework part. So
no, it's all good. It's all good. The thing is that we need to start realizing, and this is I'll try not to get distracted with or deviate in the topic. The problem comes when we try to think of the problem as by itself. I think those days or that does not exist anymore.
So
So
just what
this,
is the problem, Gurpreet? What is the problem we're trying to solve here, do you think?
I think the problem, we are trying to piecemeal the problem, but these frameworks are forcing us to think all together, and it's hard for everybody. It's hard because because of the challenges around keeping your business revenue and growth, your profitability, your investment into your tech stack. And I'll talk about insurance in specific here. This is
Yep.
very hard for companies who are 100 plus years old, who have business books that have clients that are 105 years old, because that means they still are in your claim system, they're still in your onboarded system, they're still the longest living entity as an asset, as a resource, as an individual in the books and across the systems, and they are in the legacy technology stack, which are
Yep.
very strong, but they are not very scalable and very flexible based on what we want today and what other technologies are today. So we are sort of playing ping pong with this,
Yes.
right? So I will never think that whatever NYDFS is asking for is very different from AI, or whatever AI is asking for is different from tech debt. No, it can't. You can't fully leverage AI if you
Well,
are
this is
still.
really interesting. This is really interesting. And in a sense, my understanding of one of the safeguards they wanted to put in place, and I don't fully understand exactly what they're proposing, but it's almost like, look at, before you make changes to the way you're going to do rating, check it against, like actually manually check it, or give some assurance that you've done due diligence and you're not just sort of throwing rates in, for instance, that you've actually checked it, you maybe have a proper rate card. And to me, that almost seems like a paradox. It almost seems like, and maybe I got this wrong, Gurpreet, but I'm almost sensing, go check against your legacy technology and make sure that you got a good answer, or double check it. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, it's basically asking for the governance to be stronger, the governance to be serious. That is what it is asking. Because I think technology company under the wave of agile, not that agile said this, it
Yep.
was misinterpretation by the industry, specifically the ones that wanted to run faster or eat faster than they can chew. Uh, or get on the bandwagon. I think it is misinterpretation. So it basically is saying use common sense based on new
Okay.
parameters in the market.
So it's not
God,
totally crazy or radical then. It's kind of a sane due diligence approach.
it is. It is. What is a bit radical is the timeline. Can organizations fit
Mm.
their stuff in that timeline? And what will they have to, what are the pros and cons between that, right? Because we have to understand that organizations are here to serve business. But if you look at it, if you do this, you're also de-risking yourself to some extent. So it is for the business, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that, it even raises a further question when you talk about these frameworks and bringing them in. You look at North America, they have one approach to the regulations, which is fairly open. And we're seeing that here. Govern yourself, whatever that means. I don't see a lot of like details. If we went to Europe, that might be very different.
Now you're asking a question that is, I think it is very cultural. I think it's
Okay.
the cultural difference between these geographies. If you look at the cultures between the organizations, the culture between how politics in that geography runs, how economy and what drives that economy. I think it is all related to that, right? If you look at data, EU was the first one to come up with very strong data and privacy rules,
Yep.
right? If I
Yes.
remember that, I think it was almost like 8, 9, 10 years ago now that the implementation across the industry had started. So I think that's a cultural shift and a cultural response.
It's a cultural shift. And we talked about this before, but it has some very real technology implications. And maybe I can get you to comment. I know we had a discussion before on this. It was really interesting in that those regulations are going to maybe even guide slightly different technology approaches. And the options that might be open to the insurers might differ in terms of what I might be able to purchase off the shelf as a technology in Europe versus North America. I, did I capture that right, first of all? And what are your thoughts on that?
I think it is not. I think again that goes back to a little bit of common sense. So, for example, I don't think that any government is stating or any regulation is stating you can only buy this. But
Sure.
if you put geopolitics into picture, that might come into play. Because if you have surges in certain areas that is driving towards turmoil or economic crash, or more so like, just whatever is happening globally right now between Ukraine and its counterparts, Palestine and its counterparts.
Yeah.
It's less technology and more the geopolitics stating that. So I would say the response to that kind of question would be, when you are a global company, think about your supply chain demand and try to keep aloof on who your technology servers are in that area, so that if that ever arises, you are at least de-risking that portion and you are not completely shut down if something happens.
Can we get an example of what that might mean? And I don't want to, pry much into Guardian Life detail too much, but I'm wondering, like, because you work with the technology stacks there, you're very familiar with that. What would this mean practically in terms of what you would be up to? Like, what decisions does this framework bring into place for you?
So for example, I'll give a very simple one, right? We use Google here. Google's very used in Asia's,
Yeah.
Americas, Europe's, right? But if you go into the China's in specific, it's Baidu, right?
Okay.
Similarly, I don't want to name technologies, but the way the sales forces are on one side, the Alibabas are on the other side.
True. Very true.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think there is a parallel that can be drawn in between the enterprisal solutions. And I actually had just pasted a few weeks earlier one very good comparison of geography and technology stack to choose from that is
Yep.
enterprisal. So yeah.
So, I mean, what I'm hearing, I'm just going to interpret this. One of the things I see coming out of this is that different regions might have different versions of their large language model tools, generative AI tools. Like we might have, I don't know, ChatGPT in North America, Copilot, or whatever the version is that's common. China may actually opt for their own type of training and differences, right? And I think so. We could. Do you think we might even see different firms align around that?
Absolutely. So I'll give one simple example and I'll tie this to the earlier question. So for
Yeah.
AI chatbot, we very famously use ChatGPT. It's become one of the things that every generation now knows,
Yeah.
right? Uh, on the other hand, Asia side, it's going to be Ernie. You are not allowed ChatGPT. We use Teams, they use DingTalk. We use AWS, they use Alibaba. We use Google, they use Baidu, like I said, right?
Yes.
And when you go to the infrastructure side, they are very Cisco oriented. They are very Huawei oriented. And we have to it really is important. Organizations, I really encourage all the enterprise architects and chief architects to really push in their organizations the idea of based on their global presence, separating this very much. And I think in the elaboration of this answer, I literally forgot the follow-up question. Do you mind repeating that?
Well, I've got a more, I think something more interesting I'd like to explore. There's a lot of information, and we talked earlier on, we talked about solving the problem and using, I mean, generative AI is there to solve a problem right now. And to me, the real question is, are we solving that problem effectively, or are we getting fragmented differences that aren't solving it so that an insurance company, say in China, is going to be so different than what we're doing in the States that because of that technology, maybe we're not addressing the key issue. So I guess maybe it's a question of how do you see it being used? And is there differences driven by the regulatory framework?
So I think we need to now separate this a little bit. So I think we need to separate the regulatory framework and that keep shelf that for some time.
Yeah.
But I think when AI comes into picture, one of the most important things we have to look at it, the expectation of AI is that it's going to do magic. That's what's spread in the industry. And
Yes.
when that comes to the industry, that very quickly translates to efficiency, revenue, and growth. And to achieve those, Where are you going? How are you going to achieve those is the question. So now the real question to ask is, are the operating models going to be different because of the intervention of AI? And if they are, how? So all in all, it goes back to what is the question we should be asking? Are we asking the right question? Is only one portion of the organization a target of this? Or or we just have to think differently, and now we need to collaborate with each other much more than before.
Okay.
Right? Can you afford an opportunity to miss out a group or not have them that you could do before, but now these technologies and because of what they bring to the table, you really need to have like a strong business tech relationship.
Do you think these technologies are going to cut through existing processes and cut steps out?
It can. We have a lot of that. Right? We already have a lot of that through automation. I think it's been an evolution, right? Automation was in entire 2000s. 2010s and beyond, last decade was full of RPA automation. And then last quarter of 2023, maybe took over the Gen AI. 2023 was taken over by Gen AI. But before that, it was all cloud and automation, right?
With the uses that you've seen for generative AI, what happens? Like, how severe is it if we get the wrong answers? Because it's not perfect. And like, how do we deal with the failure modes?
That's a very hard question, actually, because I'll tell you this. Me and my husband, we argued over a problem, a linear equation, or a question that my daughter had. We were helping her with her homework, and he said this was a linear equation, and I said this was a non-linear equation. So
That's quite the difference there.
Yes, yes. It's quite a difference, right? So to our rescue came ChatGPT and Bard. And he went in and he asked ChatGPT the question. We put the equation in and we said, was it linear or non-linear? And ChatGPT responds that it is linear. So he went all gaga about it. On the same hand, because of what I know and what I know about equations, I'm like, are you sure? I went into not Bar, Bing. I went into Bing, which is powered by ChatGPT, OpenAI, and I asked the same question, and that told me it was non-linear. So here you go. The same models, different interfaces.
And I'm assuming you asked the question in the same way, that there were no bias differences.
Copy paste.
Interesting.
That is very not a text question. It's not a text question. It is a mathematical question. So I want to point this out, and thank you for asking this question. I want to truly point this out. It's a mathematical equation. It is a very simple equation with two variables and three components. It's not even a massive equation. And I give it to the same model, but there are different interfaces responding to me. And I'm not sure what is happening along the way, right? But you have different responses, and you have opposite responses, not similar or little different. It's opposite responses. So I think everybody needs to understand how much can you rely on it.
Do you think frameworks are going to limit where we can use it? Like, companies are going to say, look, here's a policy where I can put this, and here's a policy where I can't put it. Like, in some cases, getting different answers is not a good outcome. Like, it's kind of fun talking about equations, but in the real world, I can see some real life situations where this can cause a lot of confusion if we're not careful.
It is, and I very purposely say that we have to be careful, and I am just talking about mathematical. When it comes to text, when it comes to emotions, when it comes to a Q&A, when it comes to those kinds of relationships, answers can take many turns and interpretations can be very different. Maths is the easiest thing to solve through models, right?
Yes.
And to the question of will the regulation limit us? I don't think so. I think it will provide guideline, because it's very hard to limit. And if it is limiting, I think it would be in the benefit. So if we think that that is limiting, it's probably our short-sightedness because we do not know about it enough. I think it is to protect us rather than to give us problem. Because what this does is this forces the AI providers to make more concrete statements, provide more secure environments, make sure that what they are selling, I think it protects all consumers. And to some extent, it also protects the providers because now they are on the hook of something they know. Otherwise, the wave can really make you do many different things.
I imagine too, when we look at this and you start to look at, different answers from generative AI, what I'm hearing out of that is it's not going to replace the need for a human forum soon, right? So for instance, we're both members of an insurance forum right now. We like to share dialogue and information. I don't see in the near future that generative AI would replace the need for that kind of dialogue. Do you?
I don't think so. I absolutely don't think so. But what it will do is it will aid us. So, for example, problems that may have been long existing, standing before which we were discussing, maybe
Yes.
now it aids that. So, for example, fraud detection. That's my favorite one,
Okay.
right? Pricing optimization. It can help with that. It's not. I don't think that it's going to take us because there are so many parameters that come into that. Target marketing, it'll segment the customer segmentation. Analysis can be easier. The support for underwriting can be easier, and I'm focused on the insurance area in specific, right? If you really have your process in place, you can truly get through like no touch claims processing, because if it is a algorithm, if this do this, if that do that, then it can really take you through that, and that can be much faster. So I truly think that for insurance industry, um, the narrative can be more focused, and that is true for any industry. These are just some of the examples that came to mind.
Great. No, they're great points. My final question, as a chief architect, what would be your advice around the adoption of generative AI for an insurance organization? If you had to give advice to anybody that's maybe in insurance or anywhere, actually.
Do it. Look forward to the technology. There is a lot more coming. Optimism is very good, but guard yourself to exposure. Make your tags more stronger, strengthen them much more than before. Ask the questions around where will the data sit? Is the
Yeah.
provider taking any accountability at all if a breach happens? If not, why
Great
not?
point.
Should you even choose that vendor? So I would strongly and don't throw common sense out of the window. It is much more needed now.
With accountability, do you see that the contractual stuff is adequate, or do you see that it's going to evolve? That
It
is
is
really,
it is evolving. It is a very evolving space. And I think the sourcing and the procurement folks are really trying, and there is nervousness around the area, and they are really trying to get a handle on everything that they can do. And I think risk and compliance along are helping with that so that the contracts are built right.
awesome. Gurpreet, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this discussion. I'm looking forward to maybe having another talk with you on edge and fog computing or something, but today this was awesome. And again, I just want to thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Bryce, for the opportunity.